Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for making the journey to be here. It's a real pleasure to see such a diverse group brought together by important shared concerns. I won't take up too much of your time, but I want to say how excited we are to meet and learn from all of you over the next 2 days. What also excites us is our partnership with Earthna and other like-minded organizations. We share common values and a vision for sustainable, culturally rooted development, and I believe this collaboration holds a great promise. Now, to deliver the opening remarks, I would like to introduce the Managing Director of Caravane Foundation, His Excellency Fahad Al-Attiyah. He has worked as a government legal counsel, a food security planner, and a diplomat with a strong military background. I'm also pleased to introduce Mr. Alireza Sagharchi, Chair of INTBAU Trustees and Principal at Stanhope Gate Architecture, who is a renowned architect, urban designer, and advocate for classical and traditional architecture. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning. I'm tasked to deliver a few minutes remarks. I will try to be concise. I'll certainly not be politically correct in a way that I will not be advocating for modern type developments, whether it's on the architectural side or the urban side. I'm calling for a total U-turn on modern architecture and to revitalize traditional architecture. The question is, what is traditional architecture? Let's begin by definitions. We have two systems. One system is modern, which is based on industrial materials, largely subjective, does not take any regard to the natural and local context or cultural context of any location. If you go to Hong Kong, London, Dubai, Doha, Houston, it's all the same. It's a subjective imposition by the architect or the planner or the urban designer on that particular society using industrial materials. That's what modern is about. Whereas tradition, and of course, that subjective view, we understand its roots. It comes from the idea that there is nothing objective in life, okay, which is a fundamental problem, and that beauty is not an objective thing, and that form follows function. These are all ideological principles that underpin the entire modern industrial mechanical development that we see happening everywhere around the world. On the flip side, tradition, which has been the way of building and constructing for multiple millennia, it only came to a halt after the First World War. How did it come to a halt? Well, new materials came in, new inventions, the car as an invention which has created disproportionality horizontally, and the elevator came in that created disproportionality vertically. I always use this analogy. If I was to, the chairs that you're seated at, if it was designed for an elephant, and I was to ask any one of you to come and sit on it, what would you feel? I think you would, the answer is pretty obvious, you would feel out of proportion, out of scale. Our cities are largely completely out of scale. They're not to human scale vertically, they're not to human scale horizontally. They've become not cities for human beings, for something else but the human, okay? It became cities for mechanized vehicles, cars and trucks and everything that we manufacture. So we became the sideshow, not the main thing that the city serves. So traditional architecture, therefore, going back to what is traditional architecture rests on three main principles. First one, design principles that find their roots in spiritual philosophy, which emanates from revelation. That's number one. That brings the cultural element, the social element, because every spiritual philosophy has a vision of how people live, whether it's Islamic, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever. It has a vision of order, it has a vision of organization, it has a vision of responsibility, duty, name it. A value system. It cannot just remain an idea. I am a Muslim, that's it. But how does it manifest in the real space? I mean, for a moment, I digress on every point I mention. How do we analyze previous civilizations today? Through their architecture. The pharaohs, the pyramids, the Mayans, and so the Romans, and now Al-Ula, many other locations. We go through that wonderful legacy of architecture to extract what? A narrative. And I always say, 500 years from now, archaeologists are going to come and try to figure out a narrative about our contemporary civilization. And I guess they will be terribly confused. From Hong Kong to Houston, glass and steel, going all the way, cars, computers, iPhones, they will exhume and they will find out what kind of a civilization is this that governed planet Earth from one end to the other. And they will find, I think they will come to the conclusion that this is corporate dictatorship because these are all industrial materials that has been forced down our throats by developers, bankers, architects, and so on and so forth. But it attaches a very dangerous, misleading, deceiving term to modern architecture, which we fall for. All of us. I certainly was one of those people who fell for it, that it's progressive. How can you be against progress? All right? But it's utterly and totally the opposite of progress. It's regressive, it degenerates not only our social structures, but the environment, the economic conditions of people, the cultural vibrancy of cities. Modern architecture is a plague and needs to be utterly uprooted and replaced with traditional architecture. So the first thing is design principles when it comes to defining what is traditional architecture. Design principles that is based on spiritual philosophy that has its roots in revelation. The second one, naturally, locally sourced materials. The third one, it has to be delivered by the mason. It has to be delivered by the artisan. It has to be delivered by the craftsman. If you have three of these things sufficient in any building, it's traditional, capital T. If you take one out, it could be pseudo-traditional, which is another problem that we have. If you take two out, it might be modern. So we have three types of architecture today. Up until 1900, we had only one, traditional architecture. Post-1900 or post Mr. GM and Ford develop sort of emancipating mankind with cars. Everyone has to own a car. Therefore, cities have to change in order to accommodate cars. And can you imagine the disproportionality this caused horizontally? Then comes Mr. Otis and says, okay, let's create another disproportion vertically. Then comes all the steel and glass manufacturers. And then comes the advocates of modern architecture or the PR pundits, or the communication agents, who happen to be architects too, like Corbusier and the rest, who promoted that form of development. I think I ought to stop. But that's generally how I perceive modern architecture to be. It's a danger, it's a plague, it's something that has to change, and we need to promote traditional architecture in, all over the place. I'd like to travel from one place to the other and identify different cultures. When I go to Pakistan, I'd like to see Pakistan. I don't like to see a parody of Dubai. Or when I go to Berlin, I'd like to see a Berlin, what Berlin likes, through their architecture, through their urbanism. Hence why people love Venice and Paris. 90 million people travel to Paris. Didn't anyone ask themselves why? If Paris was built in the image of West Bay, would anybody want to go? Just be inquisitive about the assertions made by modern architecture today, and try to understand why you love traditional architecture. Why do you like Venice? Why do you like Rome? For those of you who have traveled there, or Barcelona, or Paris, or Marrakesh, or Aleppo, or Bukhara, there's enough, or Kyoto. There's enough examples around the world. So that is harmonious, and that's what we're trying to promote, vis-a-vis the cacophony and the ugliness of the modern. And that's a good start, hopefully, to our INTBAU session. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. I'm just going to do some shameless plugging about INTBAU because it's the only opportunity I'm going to get, and save the discussion for later. I'll just say to His Excellency Fahad, if you're at the steering wheel, I'll certainly go with your U-turn for every turn. So yes, I just want to tell you very quickly a little bit about INTBAU, and firstly to thank the Qatar Foundation and also Caravane Earth. And thank Caravane Earth for hosting INTBAU Qatar and His Excellency. And I'm happy to see, actually, from the Board of Trustees of INTBAU, Dr. Akal Kahera, who's here with us, who's based in Qatar, and some of the members of the ICC, which is our International Council of Chapters, which is the beating heart of INTBAU in over 40 countries. Alejandro Garcia Hermido is here from Spain, and some of the others. INTBAU's mission is really to nurture, expand the global community who design, make, maintain, support, and promote traditional architecture and urban design. It was started in 2001 by His Majesty King Charles III, along with some of the architects, and to essentially promote his passion in architecture. I was certainly involved in his School of Architecture in the 1990s, and together with a group of like-minded and kindred spirits, INTBAU was established. We are now in over 43 chapters, spanning 6 continents, 10,000 members, and we basically operate in many, many regions and territories. The territories we cover, the chapters that we have go from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Brazil, Nigeria, Malaysia, Turkey, Serbia, Russia, Romania, Ukraine, and it's ever expanding. I was very glad to hear that yesterday also we met some delegates here from some other NGOs who are interested in joining INTBAU. We also partner with organizations that host our chapters, like Caravane Earth, who are gracious enough where they have constituency in the territories that we would like to engage in our mission. And we obviously have relationships with the King's Foundation in Australia through our relationship in the UK, Le Tabron d'Architecture, which is in Belgium, which is a group of extremely enthusiastic young architects who are passionate about traditional skills, craft, and architecture. The Caravane Earth I mentioned, the Traditional Architecture Group at the RIBA, where I was the chair for over 7 years, and the Brazilian Institute of Traditional Architecture. And obviously, and also the Institute of Classical Architecture in America. One of our main supporters is the Axon Johnson Foundation, who also partner with us with the Cambridge University Center for the Classical Studies. So INTBAU's main activities fall under about 4 categories, and that's basically education, grassroots, research, and advocacy. In education, we have programs worldwide from France to Norway, Spain, and Mexico. We run summer schools and also INTBAU-affiliated programs. I think you might be familiar with some of them. We have the Let's Build a Beautiful City summer school in Netherlands, the Enduring Design Masterclass in Australia, Iberian Summer School, which is run by Alejandro, partially in Spain and Portugal, and the Bruges Summer School. We also had the first MENA region winter school in Hinat Salma, which is a fantastic location. I encourage you all to visit. And it's a place where you get inspired and provide inspiration. And we were lucky to have people from the region as well as from the US. In the area of research, there are a number of publications that INTBAU sponsors, the most prominent of which were a handbook of renovating traditional timber roofs by grassroots grants, and also the Journal of Traditional Building and Architecture and Urbanism, and a number of our publications by our other chapters. With our grassroots program, we provide small grants. I think this morning we talked about microfinance. This is a microfinance, if you like, in action for a very socially good cause. And in 2024-25, we received some 293 applications from 78 countries. And this is not really a lot of money. It provides a spark for something to happen in a territory, whether it's the restoration of a local community church, whether it's studying something that's disappearing altogether. And we've had quite a successful programs run on some of the examples are quite diverse. One of them is, for instance, by Boulouki in Greece, which transforms rural schools into a research hub for traditional sustainable building, or upskilling women, masons in India, in order to use their skills to provide, obviously, sustenance and also promote the skills, or restoration works by Terechidia in the Hamid Oasis in Morocco. So these are all very worthwhile small programs. In advocacy, we provide a lot of support in adapting and advancing, updating local building traditions wherever it happens. And we run an architecture challenge program, which provided a prize, and we gave prizes to entries from New Zealand, Guinea-Bissau, and the United Arab Emirates. And finally, one of our quite current and major activities in post-disaster reconstruction projects. And we're supporting a number of those across. And these are not natural, they're also man-made disasters which we suffer from these days. And essentially when these happen, there is a wall of support and finance in order to remediate the effects of these. I mean, we have conflicts now in Ukraine, in Gaza. We have natural disasters in Turkey, in Greece, in Sindh, in Pakistan with the floods, where we're working with the excellent Yasmin Lari to provide flood-resilient construction. And we support all of these. And we have INTBAU active on the ground in Zolovic in Ukraine, for instance, where we are supporting the University of Notre Dame with urban design and reconstruction of some of the destroyed villages. In Antakya in Turkey, where we are looking at earthquake remediation by restoration of some of the urban fabric. And these really all encompass INTBAU's activity. INTBAU's motto has always been one world, many traditions. And I thank you all for supporting us and attending the conference. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I have to take a few minutes before we begin into the first panel. I will just introduce the first subject, the topic we're going to be speaking about. And just to give a general overview, of what it is we're trying to really get at, based on what our earlier speakers have already highlighted. So my name is Samie. I'm an architect and I'm also a researcher. And I'm affiliated here with the Caravane Earth Foundation. And also, well, I'm actually here to be asked to speak on behalf, not just Caravane Earth, but also my wife, on behalf of INTBAU Qatar. So I guess what I would just take a few minutes just to explain to you what the first opening subject is and what I'm trying to really take out from this. So the first topic theme is scaling up on traditional architecture and urbanism. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges that we have and how architects and planners can feed into those challenges and give us kind of solutions or ideas on how we can approach that subject. Now, I can tell you from my own experience, studying like traditional architecture, it's truly a humbling experience, because when you see that a 14th century stonemason can solve your passive cooling system better than your modern day architects or consultants. So it's really a humbling process, and with that humility, we're coming here today to talk about some of these ideas that we're trying to learn from, and we're trying to incorporate that into understanding what can it mean in the new cities and the new architecture that we're working on. So Qatar is actually regionally very interestingly placed. It's placed amongst great ideas, great thinkers, great civilizations. So it's actually the perfect place to have a conversation like this. But we have to also understand that these ideas, they bring there's great systems of knowledge nearby. Just 500 miles away in Iran, we know that they were producing ice in the desert. There were gardens based on water systems, regenerative technology. So how do we understand all this? How does Qatar try to make sense of all this? That's really what we're trying to get at. And now, it's perhaps the topic about scaling up traditional architecture. We should also think about lifestyle choices. Are we trying to bring traditional architecture to meet with the demands of the contemporary age and the huge energy consumption we have? Or are we simply just trying to create traditional architecture for the sake of creating it? So these are the kind of questions, the kind of challenges that we're facing, and we know that our energy consumption in this region, in Qatar, it's astronomical. So how do we contend with these challenges? So without further ado, I will invite onto the panel now. I have my guest, Dr. Kamil Mumtaz, a leading voice in traditional architecture from Lahore. There's Dr. Marwa Al-Sabouni, is an architect and author and public speaker from Homs in Syria. Welcome. And Dr. Peter Harper is an environmentalist and lecturer from the University of Bath. So we will begin our first panel. Are the mics all working? Do you just want to?
Sounds like it.
Hello?
Hi. Hi.
Kamil, you okay?
Hello?
Hello, right. So we will get straight into the subject and the idea of scaling up traditional architecture and urbanism. And I guess if you don't mind, I'll just start, I'll start with Professor Kamil Saab first, and then I'll go around because I've got you on my notes that way. So how has it been for you working in Lahore in traditional architecture? How has it been for the challenges you faced, and how you're trying to deal with the subject of scaling up?
Well, of course, it's been very tough, very difficult. In not just Lahore, but the whole world that is so enthusiastic about modernism, progress, development, to be practicing pre-industrial principles and methods and materials, constantly faced with this question, what on earth are you trying to do? The world is going forward. We are left behind. We have to catch up. And here you are taking us back. So this has been a constant question. And naturally, I have had to think through this. And I think that's a question that, if you like, we can come back to. Why indeed do we need to practice traditional urbanism and architecture today? I'd be happy to elaborate on the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a population of 13 million in Lahore, so you have lots of challenges of growth and a kind of dense urbanism, traffic, so I guess trying to address these and show how would you approach from a traditional standpoint? What do you say? How do you open the dialogue?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the question of urbanism, exploding megalopolis. It's 20 million, it's just over 11 million actually, right now. And we've just been through the process of drawing up in the urban development master plan for Lahore. And I'll put it very briefly, this is the first time, in my knowledge and experience, that the authorities, instead of inviting an international famous consultant, because these are huge projects, they just opened their doors and invited the Lahoris, ordinary citizens, a cross-section, and said, we have to do this plan. Can you tell us what kind of Lahore do you want? And you can imagine the hall just exploded. Everyone is so charged and full of, this is wrong, this should be done like this, that's the reason why everything. Everyone is so charged, and they all want to get, so it was like a fish market. And so then we were told, okay, let's continue this discussion. It went on for 2 months. In the end, the citizens decided, we do not want a Lahore for motor cars. We want a city for human beings. We do not want an engine for economic growth. We want a center of civilization and humanity based on principles of equity and justice and beauty that provides, that serves the host region and does not function as a parasite. So here, I mean, this has actually happened. Right now, of course, not unexpectedly, the spanners have been thrown in the works and it's just been frozen, but that's another story. But just to answer your point about this exploding megalopolis, the citizens said, we want no urban expansion, not 1 inch. In fact, they said, we don't want a master plan for Lahore. Yeah. Lahore cannot exist without a host region. Yeah. So they said, we want a regional structure plan for the division that provides what it is required for this population. And in this region, there are not one mega Lahore city. There are 49 urban centers. So we want no master plan for just Lahore. We want a regional structure plan and 49 master plans. And it went on like this. It was really an unbelievable thing that happened. I'm so excited about this.
Yeah. Really good to hear. So there have been movement towards a positive kind of growth from that, from the grassroots level, I guess is what you're saying. And Peter, if I can just bring you in. So from your understanding about, scaling up these kind of ideas of traditional architecture, because you set up the CAT Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales, which was a big influence to kind of create this push for environmentalism in the UK. So what can you take? What would you kind of input be on that?
Well, I could say that at the very beginning, when we started these projects, we were very purist, and we tried to use everything, local materials. In our case, it was slate rock. That was our material that we'd find all around us, slate, and other things like that. Now, in the course of 50 years, we've come to a slightly different understanding that instead of replacing traditional materials with modern materials, which often happens, is that you have an essentially modern building made with modern materials, and then it's clad with something nice, to make it look traditional. It isn't traditional. Now, so we like the idea the other way around. So you basically use your traditional materials and your traditional crafts, and you construct what is essentially a traditional building, but it needs a certain amount of extra industrial elements in order to function properly in the modern world. Yeah, because it's a different world from our ancestors. So, and we call these extra additions industrial vitamins. It's a bit like in the diet, we need vitamins to be healthy, but tiny quantities, not very much, a little bit. So that's the idea, really, is that 80–90% of the mass of a building is traditional materials. But then you need these extra things. I mean, membranes, damp-proof courses, plumbing, wiring, general servicing. I mean, you can't have a modern building without that. And these are all industrial products. There's no traditional way to do that.
Yeah. But the damp-proof courses and kind of movement towards membranes, what about like the traditional like thatch roofs? They didn't use damp-proofs. What about, I'm just thinking for myself, like, I'm not saying we go back to thatch roofs, but damp-proofing seems to be a solution that was built in light of the demands of kind of rapid urban development.
Well, there are some things for which there is no traditional answer. Yeah. I mean, obviously we had waterproof roofs. I mean, Of course, in Britain it rains a lot. I don't need to. So we have to have these big pitched roofs, which we have everywhere. And we have traditional materials like slate and tiles and things like that. But generally speaking, you have an impervious layer.
I guess what you're saying is to scale up, there needs to be some kind of a hybrid kind of thinking towards it. The idea of supplanting tradition with some elements that have to be in kind of industrialized.
I think that's true. It's partly a question of cost. It's a question of cost. So if you do everything in an artisanal spirit, it looks beautiful. It looks lovely, but it costs a fortune. Yeah. And that means it's just for the rich. You can't have it. It can't be rolled out for mass things. So in order to do that, we have to somehow. Perhaps this is heretical. We have to industrialize the process of making a lot of these traditional materials and getting them onto site in particular ways. So we have to think about that in order to scale up properly.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's very interesting because we have Mr. Kamil talking about Lahore and the new traditional master plan and kind of getting the grassroots movements. And with you also, you had success at the CAT Centre, you kind of set it up, and that's kind of moved and become like an education centre. So it is interesting and in that respect. So I guess build it and they will come, So is that the kind of way you could see it? Like do it and it inspires people to move forward?
Yes. I mean, we've tried to push the principles, like for example, we have one very large building, about the size of this room here, building, public building, with no cement. We just said right, there will be no cement here. No concrete, no cement. It's just built of wood and earth and sheep's wool for insulation. And that's it. And so it can be done.
Okay,
it can be done. But, well, it was rather expensive.
Yeah, this seems to be the factor. I think the cost element, definitely.
Yes.
But before we come into that, let me just bring Marwa. Thank you for coming. Marwa, so happy to have you from Homes, and you write about architecture, you write about the challenges. What do you think about the idea of kind of scaling up on traditional architecture?
Well, on general, I think the fact that we are discussing traditional architecture in binary, in reverse to modernism, it raises the question if it's a risk that we are taking towards making traditionalism an ideology, like a counter ideology to the ideology of modernism in itself. And I guess in order to avoid that, we have to think about this moment when architecture has stopped becoming a response to its context and becoming, it's an ideology. Behind any ideology, there's a salesman, and it's the idea that discussed by Mr. Fahad when the aftermath of the World War II and actually the First War as well, where the global economy had shifted towards mega planning in order to compensate the old systems. And for our regions, we were kind of collateral damage. We were swept away with these urban policies that had introduced one size to all. And in my work, I'm interested to see how, for example, the rural urbanism had almost been abolished by the civic or the urban idiom. And for that, we kind of mixed the vernacular with the civic or the urban idiom.
Yeah.
And it's also something that traditionalism often fall, in the traps of, and becoming anti-architecture. When it conflate the vernacular response to its to the simplistic rural context versus the urban traditional idiom, which has been formed by things we have two voids for now. We have the spiritual void that was the formulating factor for many of what we call traditional. And the other void is the political void as well, because power had, been totally transformed in our modern age, from the world of empires to the world of global economy. And the money today is actually the formulating power behind the idioms that we are discussing solely from the point of view of architecture or form.
That's very interesting. You touched on so many things. You mentioned from civilization to kind of the modern age, and then a place like Homs, you have such a fantastic history of ideas and thinking about building. I mean, is there been much movement or response to traditional architecture in Homs, or is it something which is still quite challenges because of the modern day requirements of lifestyles that people want, like Kamil Saab said, people want to be seen as being modern and going forward, and they feel maybe that tradition is pulling them back. Do you feel like this is also a conversation?
Well, actually, the Levant, or Syria, where Homs is part of, is a place where it's the oldest inhabited. For example, Damascus is the oldest inhabited capital in the world, and this fact means that civic response was part of a very, very long history. And in order to make sense of this idea, you have to see that there were many styles. No one at a certain point called that traditional. You know, it was the response of the time and the response of the place where those two voids were avoided. You know, and in Syria up until the 20th century, actually the early 20th century, heritage wasn't, you know, quite a buzzword as it is today, because it was part of the living reality of people. And it's very important that buildings do not be hijacked into becoming a museum pieces, you know. It has, in my view, traditional architecture or meaningful architecture, I would like to stress on that, should be part of the everyday life of people. And because the modernist project had swept away, you know, all the civic responsibility from people, you no longer have people who are building their houses by themselves. You do not have public buildings that are part of a government vision. It's all led by the corporate industry of building. And in my work, in my first book, I make the connection between the vandalism that took place over the old parts of homes by the French plan, basically, and followed by the regime's measurements, in order to, you know, which created this void of making people do not belong to their places, they do not have a place where they can respond, they can express themselves and connect themselves to their city.
Yeah, there's a lot said, and I want to pick up on something just because Mr. Fahad also mentioned. There's also this kind of rise of this pseudo kind of interpretations of what we can do. So it's modernism with this kind of copy-pasted symbolic reference to tradition, perhaps in
pastiche, you know.
Pastiche, yeah, it's Islamic architecture. So I know your PhD is also on this too. Like, it's kind of limited to very simple repetitions of, you know, patterns and dome and symbolic, but not really understanding the heart of it. So perhaps what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to take the idea of pseudo pastiche out of the conversation. I'm trying to show that perhaps there is something, whether it's ethical or social responsibility, or perhaps it's based on the approach that we're doing, that can bring us back to this notion of traditionalism. Perhaps that's what I just want to be clear that it does often get mixed up with this term Islamic architecture creeps in, and then that also is a field of study which I think has a lot more to offer than it has been studied so far. So if I can, I'll open up to questions from the audience to us. And would you like to say something, sorry, before I go?
I think that is an extremely important aspect that you've just raised, and I would like, before we open the house for further discussion, I would like to bring in some cold, hard-nosed realism. There's a lot of emotion, romanticism attached both to modernism and to tradition. I would just like to remind ourselves where we are today. We are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction of species. This is the first mass extinction caused by human activity. The rates of this extinction are just mind-blowing. This is not natural. This is terminal, let's face it. There's no other way of describing. How on earth did we get here? What is that activity that has caused our own destruction?
Greed, I would say.
Absolutely. In one word, I would agree. It's greed. And that expresses itself in terms so favored by modernists: progress, development, evolution. And it's really naked greed for more and more and more, wanting more than we need. So this is the result of overproduction arising out of this insane, there's no other word for it, this is insanity, it's madness, to insist, to persist on pursuing the same path that has caused our own destruction. And that is, I'll put it another one word that sums up: development. And that's a paradigm, it's a philosophy, it's a mindset. Development means nothing. Development of what? It's an absurd idea. And it's illogical. Nothing can develop and develop and develop forever. It's not possible. And yet, the narrative is development, but we must develop. So, what I would suggest, let us look at least, okay, this may be a minority position. I know that people define tradition in different ways in terms of time, the past, forms, these kind of materials, etc. I would suggest, and at least I do, look at tradition as a return to normality. We are driving ourselves to extinction because we have deviated from the norm. All living organisms spend their lives navigating between the limits of sustainability. The minimum that the organism requires for sustenance, extracting from the environment not more than what the environment can regenerate. That's the top and bottom limit. And the norm is the precise balance between what we extract and what we give back. It's very mathematical, precise, quantifiable. There's no romance in this.
But isn't architecture is about dealing with the excess? You know, this excess that we have. It's what distinguishes from other beings, from animals, for example.
Yeah, but if it leads to your self-destruction, stop it.
Of course, I mean, it's...
So don't deal with it, stop it.
Or find alternative ways to deal with it.
We have been finding, we have been following, we have been living the sustainable way for 300,000 years. For God's sakes, in the blink of an eye, we have gone to the rate of change which is infinite. This is not progress, this is terminal.
If anybody wants to challenge, welcome to questions here. Ali, yes, please.
Wholeheartedly agree with Kamil. Yeah, that's fine. I think in order to kind of curtail the discussion somewhat to a more realistic basis, I think some first principles. I think we should define what we mean with scaling up, because I think if scaling up means mass development, rapid, unadulterated development, then that's not scaling up. Scaling up in a humanistic tradition is organic scaling up. A human being cannot grow, unadulterated to become a giant. A family grows by having additional members. So when we're looking at scaling up development, and say one example of that could be encouraging low-rise, high-density development rather than high-rise, low-density development, then all the other facets, by introducing small elements like what I call, you mentioned the vitamin, and what I call transient technology into what is essentially a traditional organism, you can actually achieve the goals that we want, that we're looking for. So, for instance, by just simply encouraging low-rise, high-density housing and introducing a sustainable element or two within the construction of, say, houses like that, you can achieve your goal. The other thing is really this confusion about progress and modernity and modernism. You know, traditionalists have made a beast out of modernists and vice versa. I think once we realize that modernity is actually a qualitative category, not a chronological category. You don't have to be doing the thing that everybody is thinking about doing tomorrow to be modern. It is the quality with which you live, the quality with which you build. And I think traditional architecture and urban design provides the quality of life and quality of well-being that is utterly modern, actually, in my opinion.
Thank you, Ali. Really appreciate your input. Yeah, the idea of scaling up is definitely in itself the question about scaling up traditional architecture. Also, it's a tricky one because you're also implying the idea that traditional architecture, there's a need for the city to be developed in that way and scaled up. And so in itself, the question is it's a tricky one to even try to attempt to talk about in that sense, try to meet. So I guess the answer was also there. Do we need to have that kind of development? Do we need to have these kind of systems? That's the question there. So another question, yeah, there.
Good morning, everybody. I'm an Algerian architect. Are you hearing me? My English is not good enough to. I have two things to maybe to ask. The first thing, the definition of traditional architecture. As Marwa said, there is a risk to be for elitistic thing. I mean, modified or just in the museum. The second thing I want to ask the panelists is about informal settlement. If you are talking about the definition of traditional architecture, the human scale, the local materials, the popular life, we found all these in the informal settlement. How far could architects and urban planners take lessons from informal settlement to develop new definition of traditional architecture?
So the first part we understood, yeah? Do you want the second part? You're not sure? Sorry. So are you able to just summarize the second part?
The second part is about slums and informal settlement.
Yeah.
The slums,
Yeah,
yes.
the slums and informal
There is
settlement.
lessons, there is a human scale, there is the usage of local materials in slums. How far could architects took lessons from the slums?
Yeah. Would you like me to?
You can start.
Okay. So it's a very important question because as you may or may not know that 40% of the Syrian population, for example, lived in what we call informal housing areas, and now it's up to over 60% of people. What the question asks if that there are qualities for architects to be inspired from the informalities or from slums. I guess these qualities that he is referring to are simply being, off the grid, being, managed to escape the regimentation of the system that was imposed by the modernist views, and which usually just about taxation, about control also, and about domination. So it's a fair question to ask, but I guess it's also, we have to highlight that people are not normally happy living in slums or in informalities, and there are so many mistakes that takes place in those areas, being places of antisocial behaviors and higher rates of crime and so on and so on. And I guess the absence here is the absence of the work of the architect or the work of the aesthetics or those values that we were speaking of. So, and you can easily see that the solution is by challenging those systems, the hegemony of the systems.
Yeah, thank you. Peter, would you like to say something? You're okay on that? Kamil sir?
Just very briefly, if I may. What did the architects learn from the slums? I'll just give a short example again from this new law planning exercise. One of the first things that the consultants did was to do a survey, and they gave their first report back. Incidentally, the process the citizens insisted on was a continuous feedback and back and forth with the citizens. So they gave us the results and pointed out the, I believe it's called strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, something like that. And they decried this situation as so horrible. The majority of people don't even have electricity. They have no access to the internet. And the response to them was, I mean, look, we already don't, yeah, right, we don't have electricity. We're going to have even less. We have to get to live without any electricity, without the internet. And you can learn from us how to live without these gadgets. That's just one thing. The other thing I would like to just briefly point out is a reference to about development and alternate and other forms of development. I know there's even talk about sustainable development. For heaven's sakes, I mean, sustainable development? But development is not sustainable. So this is the extent to which we are completely trapped in this silly idea of perpetual development forever and ever. Sorry, I forget the other point I wanted to say, but please.
Sorry, just to argue with Kamil a bit. So if you were to take a typical informal settlement, slum, let's call it, with all this, everybody's just doing the best they can, for their family. Now, supposing you actually were to provide proper infrastructure, there were drains and running good water and so on, things like that. Now, I could say that's development, and I'm sure they would agree that's development, but it's not necessarily growth. It's an improvement. Yeah. It's a different thing. So it's rather like we all grow until we're about 18 or something like that, and then we stop growing, and then we become nicer, don't we? So
hopefully.
Well, inshallah. Yeah. So I think we have to think of development in those terms, of development as improvement, not as growth, which I think is what you're.
But there is a social stigma to informal. So in the example of Syria, for example, there are those installed infrastructure and systems and all of that. But there is this social stigma about living in a less of a status of a place. That's one thing. And the other thing is that by the nature of building those places on the margins of the city's activity, people remain marginalized, remain alienated in those places, and that perpetuates a cycle of social stigma.
Yeah, interesting point you brought out, Peter. And it's about the quality of development. I think the criteria you say should be quality rather than quantity. Excellent point. That is precisely the difference. That's precisely what we need to understand. And it's not my idea. Eric Fromm, I think, wrote a whole book on to have or to be. The problem is precisely defining development in terms of material possessions, in terms of GDP. Now, if you define development in terms of quality, of being a better human being, well, we've always been very good human beings, or at least recognized the need to become better human beings.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be forced to draw this to a close. I'm sorry, there will be chance to speak with the speakers. Just to quickly summarize, if I have a quick minute, it was a mammoth of a topic. It was an easy topic to get through. Please do forgive me if I couldn't live up to your expectations. But we spoke about these ideas, about the problems, the way we are contextualizing the idea of development, what our cities mean, what does really growth mean. And Marwa fantastically spoke about, these systems of how hegemony, these structures that we're importing and we're allowing to kind of dictate what that drive to develop means. And of course, Peter, your kind of input on what we really mean by traditional. I think you were trying to get at that, and can we really make it into a solution that can last the test of time, basically, in the modern day lifestyles, I guess you were trying to say. And of course, Kamil Saab, thank you for your passionate response, very much welcomed. And it's really great to hear about Lahore's great success you're having, and we'd love to know more about it, yeah? So thank you so much. I'll draw this session to a close, and we'll continue on afterwards. Thank you so much.